Hello, everybody. Welcome back to We're Talking Movies. And as always, I'm Andrew Duvall, joined by Cade. And today we're talking about a favorite of mine, and we're going back a little ways with this one. We're going back to the year 2000, and we're talking about Chicken Run, the first full-length feature film done by Aardman Animation. Now, when it comes to why I love this movie, let's start off with the animation. Now, Aardman Animation Studios to this point had kind of been establishing themselves as one of the premier forces in animation, especially in claymation. Even though that pool is small, it is not tiny. But it was this movie that truly cemented Aardman as the kings of claymation, because there is some very complicated animation in this movie. What comes to mind for me is the likes of the pie making machine and the escape crate at the end of the movie. Those are some very complicated pieces of animation, and the fact that it's all done practically with clay, I find incredibly impressive because it all looks very woofy smooth and very well animated, which again I find incredibly impressive. And it still holds up to this day. Cade, would you agree on that?
Yeah, I do agree. I think the animation is definitely fantastic. And I look back at other films that are similar to this, the similar type of animation like Wallace and Gromit, Curse of the Were-Rabbit, or even Flushed Away. Although I do like those movies, I think that of the three, this one is definitely the strongest. I don't know if you agree with that.
Ooh, that is a hard one because there is some very good animation in the movies you mentioned, and honestly, there's even some good animation in some of their later pictures, like Early Man and the Shaun the Sheep movies. But I think I would tend to agree with you, just because, again, some of the scenes they did for this movie are incredibly complicated, and the fact that they were able to claymate it all and it still looks good over 20 years later, I definitely would agree with you on that one. Wallace and Gromit again still looks incredible, and all the other stuff still looks very good. But I think this one is probably the most complicated and thus I would say the best.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the reasons why when you look back at this movie, you can really appreciate it for what it achieved.
No, I completely agree. Let's move on to another thing that I thoroughly enjoy about this movie. Let's talk about the cast of chickens we have in this movie, which is
Yes.
a sentence I never thought I would say, but here we are. This is a very fun cast of chicken characters. So that's why I can describe it. You got Ginger, who here voiced by Julie Sawal. She got this very headstrong, rebellious hen who's never say die attitude. Makes for a great protagonist, and she plays off really well with Rocky the Rhode Island Red, voiced by Mel Gibson, who is literally her exact opposite in every way, but pretends to be, this ultra, macho hero, but is really this just complete coward who does everything to try to, pun intended, chicken his way out of everything. But by the end of the movie, does come around and ends up helping to save the day.
Yeah, and I would say that one other thing that's really great when it comes to Julia and Mel's performances as both Ginger and Rocky is just how great their chemistry is together, despite only being voice performances.
Indeed.
Yeah, and honestly, one other performance that I really like, aside from, Julia and Mel, I also look back at Miranda Richardson and Tony Haygarth as Mr. and Mrs. Tweedy. I think that those two performances are really two standouts in the film as well.
I love the Tweedies in this movie. They are such great and hilarious animated villains because, for number one, you got Mrs. Tweedy as this cartoony evil woman who's only interested in money and hating her husband, but is still also ruthless and villainous. I mean, she does, try to chop Ginger's head off with an axe. And then there's Mr. Tweedy, who is this perfect comedic foil for her because he's a complete dolt who continuously messes up his wife's evil plans and while trying to get her approval on everything. But he also spends the entire movie getting gaslit by the chickens because he's trying to convince everybody, like, no, those chickens are up to something. They're conspiring against me. But, like, nobody believes him and nobody takes him seriously. They're just a really great comedic pair of villains, and I absolutely love them. I think they do not get nearly enough love as animated villains to this day. And there is one other character I'd like to mention, and that is Fowler, the old rooster from the Tweety farm. And I just think he kind of low key steals the show as this sort of rambling grandpa character who won't shut up about his glory days.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is because of Benjamin Withro's performance. I think that he really brought a lot of life to the screen.
He really did. Again, it low key stealing the show, I think, is the best way to describe him because I think we've all met somebody like that who just won't shut up about, back in my day, I was the man.
Yeah, and I think that other than the cast and all the characters that the movie has to offer, another thing that I will have to say is definitely a pro for me is looking back at the film is I actually do like the concept of the movie because if you think about it, the chickens trying to escape the farm and escape the Tweedies. In a way, if you think about it, it's almost kind of like a prison escape film in some way. The chickens are all these prisoners, the farm being this prison. And if you look at Mr. and Mrs. Tweedy, Mrs. Tweedy is almost like the sort of cruel warden of this facility, whereas Mr. Tweedy could be viewed as the head guard of it. And I think that that's really a unique concept for this film and the story as well.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. Best, I think the best description I ever heard was it's the Great Escape on a farm.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And honestly, it's a very original concept and it works really well. And I'm going to say it's still really funny. It's got that very dry British humor to it, which I'm a big fan of. I know not everybody loves that type of humor, but I'm a big fan of it. And yeah, honestly, yeah, I just really like this movie. But I think we do have a couple of little nitpicks here and there. In my opinion, my only real con with this movie is that the second act of this movie does feel a little slow. Like the first act is obviously introducing all the chickens, introducing the Tweeties and how Rocky joins the mix, and the idea of, hey, we're all gonna try to escape. And then the second act is kind of just a little slow in my opinion, because it's mostly just Rocky trying to weasel his way out of everything and then trying to teach the hens how to fly, which it goes on a little long in my opinion. And then it picks up very much toward the end of the second act when Ginger has to get rescued from the pie making machine. And then obviously the third act with the actual big escape at the end is fantastic. But yeah, I just feel like it's a little too slow in the middle. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. And look, I want to just be clear. I don't have any issue with stories that kind of take a more slow burn turn at some point. The only issue is, yeah, I do agree where things are kind of slow in the middle. I think, back when I was first watching this movie, I honestly thought, yeah, okay, can we kind of just pick things up a little bit? I get that we're trying to figure out how to fly and Rocky's trying to weasel his way out, like you said, but can something just happen, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, and I think that's again, I that is my only big nitpick with this movie, and that's something that Aardman would kind of pick or would fix in later films, like say Flushed Away or Wallace and Gromit. But yeah, no, again, that's my only real big nitpick with this movie. I do really like it; it does hold up really well. I wouldn't say it's one of my all-time favorite animated movies, or honestly, even my favorite Aardman movie. But again, I do still enjoy it. So, Kate, if you were to give this a ranking, what would it be for you?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I think I would give this movie a solid 8.
Solid 8. Wow, that's actually higher than me. I was going to say a solid 7.5, but still by no means a bad movie. And again, one we both thoroughly enjoy. All right. And with that, I've been Andrew. This has been Cade. This has been We're Talking Movies. Thank you all for watching. Please, again, remember to like and subscribe. And also remember to follow us on Instagram and Threads, with X soon to follow.